In 1966, 15 men led by a former Marine named Donald Chambers decided they'd had enough of rules, laws, and authority, and in that moment, the Bandidos Motorcycle Club was born. What started in the dusty backroads of Texas soon exploded into one of the most violent and feared biker empires in the world. From drug wars and assassinations to international turf battles with the Hells Angels, the Bandidos left a trail of blood stretching across 22 countries and over 300 chapters. For nearly 60 years, they've lived by one code: loyalty above all. Fear is their weapon, and power is their purpose. The birth of an outlaw legend. The name Bandidos didn't come from some wild idea or random inspiration. It had meaning. Donald Chambers, a tough-as-nails Marine Corps veteran, chose it deliberately. He named his club after the Mexican bandits of the old days, men who lived by their own code and refused to answer to anyone. For Chambers, this wasn't just a name, it was a statement, a declaration of rebellion against the world that played by rules he no longer believed in. And then came the logo, the face of the rebellion. You've probably seen it, a grinning Mexican bandit with a huge sombrero, a pistol in one hand, and a machete in the other. Members call him the Fat Mexican. Those bold red and gold colors weren't random either. Chambers picked them to honor the U.S. Marine Corps, the brotherhood that shaped him. Soon, that patch became more than just a logo. It was a warning, a sign that the Bandidos had arrived and they weren't to be messed with. Some say the design was inspired by the Frito Bandito cartoon from corn chip commercials. But here's the twist. The Bandidos were founded in 1966. That cartoon didn't even exist until 1967. So maybe it's not the Bandidos who copied anyone. Maybe it's the other way around. From day one, Chambers built the club like a military unit. This wasn't your average group of weekend riders looking for fun. He wanted discipline. He wanted power. Members called him Mother, not as a joke, but as a mark of respect and fear. Club meetings felt more like army briefings than hangouts, and if someone stepped out of line, the punishment was immediate and often brutal. Loyalty wasn't optional. It was the only rule that mattered. The men who joined knew exactly what they were signing up for. They proudly wore the 1%er label, a term born when a motorcycle association once said that 99% of bikers were law-abiding. The Bandidos embraced being the other 1%. To them, that patch wasn't just cloth, it was identity. It was defiance. It was their way of saying to the world, we don't live by your rules, we make our own. The Great Nordic Biker War. If you think American biker wars were violent, what happened in Northern Europe during the 1990s makes them look almost tame. The Nordic Biker War wasn't about bar fights or parking lot scuffles. It was all-out warfare, fought with weapons that belonged on a battlefield, not the streets. When the Bandidos expanded into Scandinavia, they walked straight into enemy territory, the heartland of the Hells Angels. In 1993, under the leadership of Jim Tindon, the Bandidos established their first Danish chapter. But Tindon had no plans to play by anyone else's rules. The Hells Angels wanted control. They wanted to dictate how far the Bandidos could spread. Tindon refused to bow, and that defiance lit the fuse. The real spark came on January 22, 1994. In Sweden, a club known as the Morbids MC had been offered Hells Angels membership, but only if they agreed to merge with another rival club. The Morbids didn't like being told what to do. Instead, they turned to the Bandidos and became a probationary chapter. That single decision turned tension into open war. For the next 3 years, Denmark and Sweden turned into war zones. The streets saw rocket-propelled grenades, machine guns, and even anti-tank missiles, all real weapons stolen straight from military armories. On February 20th, 1995, Bandidos members broke into a Swedish army depot and made off with 17 rocket launchers, automatic rifles, pistols, landmines, and grenades. The very next day, they fired an anti-tank missile at a Hells Angels clubhouse. It didn't stop there. In March 1996, members of both clubs were returning home from a European biker conference when the Hells Angels staged an ambush at Copenhagen Airport. Shots rang out in the parking lot. One Bandido was killed. 3 others were wounded. The Bandidos didn't wait long to hit back. Months later, they launched a rocket-propelled grenade into a packed Hells Angels clubhouse during a party with over 150 people inside. 2 men died, 19 were injured, and the message was clear. This wasn't brotherhood anymore. It was war. By By the late 90s, even the leaders realized things had gone too far. The bloodshed was drawing massive police attention, shutting down money-making operations across Europe. So the two sides agreed to a truce, not because of peace, but because war had become bad for business. The American expansion and bloody rivalries. While the Bandidos were building their global empire overseas, back home in America, they were waging a different kind of war. One fought on highways, in bars, and across entire states. Through the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, their message was simple and brutal. Patch over and ride with us, or get out of the way. And most clubs knew better than to resist. One after another, states like Louisiana, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Mississippi fell under Bandido control. But with expansion came cracks. The bigger the empire grew, the harder it became to hold together. Leadership changed hands again and again. James Edward Lang took over as the club's third international president, only to end up behind bars. Then came Charles Craig Johnston, and he too was sentenced to 10 years on drug charges in 1998. After him, George Wiegers stepped in and led the club until 2005, when he was convicted of racketeering and sent away for nearly 2 years. Then came Jeffrey Fay Pike, a man who would drag the Bandidos deeper into violence than ever before. He became national president in 2006, and under him, the club turned into something even darker. Pike wasn't just a leader, he was obsessed with control, paranoid, ruthless, and quick to spill blood if it meant keeping power. Under his rule, the Bandidos didn't just defend their territory, they ruled it with fear. That same year, 2006, their name was linked to one of the most chilling assassinations in Texas biker history. The victim was Anthony Benish, a 44-year-old rider who was trying to start an Austin chapter of the Hells Angels. He'd been getting threats, calls warning him to stop wearing the Angels patch, but he didn't back down. On March 18th, the very weekend the Bandidos were celebrating their 40th anniversary, Benish was leaving a restaurant with his girlfriend and 2 kids when a single rifle shot rang out. The bullet hit him in the head. He died instantly. It wasn't random, it was a message. The shooter had taken aim from a distance, steady and deliberate, making sure the shot hit only Benish despite the crowd around him. Years later, 4 Bandidos were arrested and charged for the murder. Behind all of it stood Pike and his vice president, John Xavier Portillo, the masterminds. Together they ran the Bandidos like a mafia syndicate, creating layers of protection between themselves and the bloodshed they ordered. They planned murders, sanctioned hits, and ran drug and weapons operations across the Southwest. They even struck deals with the Texas Mexican Mafia, blending organized crime with outlaw biker culture. But in 2018, their empire finally started to crumble. After a 3-month federal trial, both men were found guilty on charges that read like a crime saga: racketeering, conspiracy, murder in aid of racketeering, extortion, and weapons trafficking. Pike was sentenced to life plus 10 years. Portillo got 2 consecutive life sentences plus 20 years. The Bandidos had become what Chambers once dreamed of, a true empire, but it was built on fear, violence, and blood. And like every empire built that way, it was only a matter of time before it began to fall. Waco, the deadliest day, May 17th, 2015, a Sunday that began like any other but ended as one of the bloodiest days in American biker history. Nearly 200 bikers rolled into a Twin Peaks restaurant in Waco, Texas. On paper, it was supposed to be a routine meeting, a gathering for the Texas Council of Clubs and Independents, a motorcycle rights group, but anyone who knew the outlaw scene could feel something brewing beneath the surface. Tension between the Bandidos and the rising Cossacks Motorcycle Club had been simmering for months, and it all came down to something outsiders might laugh at: a patch. The small word Texas stitched at the bottom of a biker's vest. To most people, it's nothing, but in the outlaw world, it's everything. It's territory, it's power, it's identity. And in Texas, that bottom rocker belonged to the Bandidos. No one else had the right to wear it without their approval. The Cossacks ignored that rule, and by doing so, they challenged the empire. When the Bandidos arrived from Dallas that morning, they found the parking lot already packed with Cossacks. The air was thick. It only took a few words before things exploded. Voices rose, fists flew, and then came the gunfire. In less than 2 minutes, Twin Peaks turned into a war zone. Bullets tore through the air as bikers ducked behind cars and motorcycles, some firing back, others pulling knives. Terrified customers scrambled for cover inside the restaurant as the fight spilled across the lot. When it was over, 9 bikers were dead and 20 more were badly injured. Even police, who had been watching from nearby, opened fire, adding to the chaos and confusion. When the shooting stopped, the scene was almost unbelievable. Blood on the pavement, bikes scattered everywhere, weapons lying beside bodies. Police swarmed in and made mass arrests, 177 people in total, the largest roundup connected to a single criminal event in Texas history. McLennan County District Attorney Abel Reyna decided to charge every single person with the same crime, engaging in organized criminal activity. But what followed was a legal disaster. Over the next 4 years, hundreds of cases fell apart. Only one ever made it to trial, and it ended in a mistrial. Eventually, every single charge was dropped. No convictions, no justice, just a pile of bodies and a moment that would forever define the outlaw world. The Waco shootout became a symbol, not just of how far biker wars had gone, but of how unstoppable the Bandidos' empire of fear had become. The empire. Today, even after decades of wars, arrests, and internal betrayals, the Bandidos haven't faded. They've evolved. As of 2025, they still stand as one of the most feared and powerful outlaw motorcycle clubs on Earth. With roughly 3,000 to 3,500 members spread across 303 chapters in 22 countries, they remain a global empire on two wheels, second only to the Hells Angels in size and reach. Their presence stretches far beyond the American highways where they began. You'll find Bandidos colors flying across the US, Europe, Australia, Asia, and Latin America, everywhere from Texas to Thailand. And no matter where they are, one thing never changes. The name still commands fear. In February 2025, that fear turned into headlines again. Federal prosecutors in Houston announced sweeping charges against 14 members of the Bandidos and their support club, the Mascareros. The case laid out a brutal pattern, a racketeering conspiracy built on murder, attempted murder, arson, robbery, and assault. According to the indictment, the Bandidos weren't just protecting their territory, they were enforcing a monopoly, determined to control every motorcycle club in the Houston area through sheer violence. Among the accusations, the December 2023 arson of the County Line Ice House in Montgomery County and the November 2021 murder of a rival biker on an Interstate 10-feeder road. It was a reminder that, even after all these years, the Bandidos' empire still operates with the same firepower and fear that built it. Today, law enforcement around the world officially classifies the Bandidos as an organized crime syndicate, one of the Big Four alongside the Hells Angels, Outlaws, and Pagans. Authorities estimate between 1,500 and 2,000 members in the U.S. alone, with another 1,500 overseas. And through it all, the message from the club remains unchanged, the same words that have carried them from backroom bars in Texas to every corner of the world. Bandidos forever, forever Bandidos, the legacy of fear. So how do you even begin to understand the story of the Bandidos? How did a handful of angry Vietnam veterans and restless outlaws turn a small Texas motorcycle club into one of the most feared criminal empires on the planet, an empire that survived for nearly 60 years? The truth is, the Bandidos didn't just offer a place to ride, they offered something deeper. For men who felt abandoned, unwanted, and forgotten by the world, the club gave structure, purpose, and a sense of belonging. Donald Chambers didn't just create a motorcycle club, he built a new kind of brotherhood, one that operated by its own laws, its own justice, and its own twisted sense of loyalty. They thrived because they filled a void. The men who joined weren't looking for peace, they were looking for power, identity, and respect in a world that had taken those things from them. And the price of that loyalty? It was steep. It came in blood, violence, and fear, spilling into streets, tearing apart families, and claiming lives of both rivals and brothers alike. Even now, when you see that fat Mexican patch, the sombrero-wearing bandit clutching a pistol and machete, you're not just looking at a logo. You're seeing 6 decades of rebellion and brotherhood, of bloodshed and domination. You're seeing what happens when 15 men decide they'd rather build their own empire, no matter how dark, than kneel to anyone else's rules. That's the story of the Bandidos. That's the empire of fear that Donald Chambers and his brothers built back in a dusty Texas town in 1966. And make no mistake, that empire is still riding today.